gonna have to hold the microphone in my hand. Hey, friendles, I'm Kendall, and I couldn't create a concise summary to save my life. Anyway, since you clicked on this video, you're here to watch me make a Gangle doll. Well, sculpting her is more like it. And by sheer coincidence, episode 4 of the Amazing Digital Circus came out around the time I was sculpting her. It was a coincidence, I promise. Getting to the concept art, I started by doodling how I wanted my Gangle doll to look and function. I swapped the ball joints for a joint similar to that of an action figure. I don't know what they're called. They look like beans. We're just going to call them beans. I swapped the ball joints for beans while devising a magnet system that'll hold her mask onto her neck. Once I worked out how I wanted her to function, I drew out an orthographic image, making sure to map out the construction of her joints and her body. Since a body made solely of ribbons at such a small scale is impossible, I'll be printing her in clear resin. Now that I have my orthographic image, it's time to jump into the blockout phase. I explain this with pretty much every other project, but the blockout phase is simply taking some simple shapes and pushing and pulling them into the general silhouette of your sculpture. This is typically the fastest part of any sculpt, but for Gangle specifically, it was actually quite simple. Trying to make a base for her mask during the blockout phase caused me a surprising amount of problems. It wasn't anything regarding pulling the points into place or anything like that. Not even extruding the mask to give it a little thickness, that was all pretty simple. The thing that was causing me problems was trying to subdivide it when it was mirrored. And for some reason, every time I subdivided the mask, it looked like butterfly wings. I tried using part of a sphere, but gave up on that pretty quickly, and eventually settled on using a very thin rectangle. I did everything I originally did to the original plane, and it worked out this time. Yeah, I couldn't tell you why the mirroring function wasn't working on the plane from earlier, but here we are. Since I plan on having her mask attached to her neck with magnets, I took a hot dog, made it into a half moon, and made sure it was formed to the shape of her neck and her mask. Now that I have all her base shapes, I merge together any shapes that need merging before adding detail. To extrude the ribbons on the arms and legs, I masked out the shape of the ribbon, polygrouped the mask, then I remeshed the group so its topology is organized enough, and then I extruded the polygroup so we have a proper appendage ribbon. The process of extruding the ribbon on the limbs is pretty straightforward, and as it stands, there's actually a couple different ways to do this, but on the body, it got a lot harder. So I'm going to just speed through the multitude of ways I tried to extrude the body ribbon because I had a surprisingly hard time getting a result that I liked. Okay, first try. I masked the ribbon all around the body, polygrouped the mask, remeshed the polygroup, and then extruded the polygroup to make the body wrapping ribbon. That's a very valid way to extrude the body ribbon, but when I tried doing that, it didn't look the way I hoped, and it was incredibly time-consuming. The result itself isn't bad, it's just not what I was hoping for. After deciding to leave the body alone for a while, I decided to revisit the ribbon on the limbs, thinking I could do better this time. I used the bend curve function on a long rectangle to form the ribbon on the arm, and I decided I liked that a lot better than the previous extrusion. I did the same thing with the legs and then attempted it on the body. This was frustrating. I tried to use some special functions to turn the rectangle into a spiral, and it didn't work like I hoped. I even tried to insert a spiral that I could hopefully edit in a properties menu in the sidebar, but I, for the life of me, have never been able to get the same properties menu as those obscure software-specific YouTube tutorials that'll have at most 2,000 views. Something else I tried was extruding the rectangle at the bottom and making that spiral around the body, but I really didn't have the patience for that. What I ended up doing was using the bend curve function on a long rectangle and repeatedly doing that around the body. Manually. Multiple times over. Once I was satisfied, I dynameshed the ribbon into one big springy piece and remeshed it so the topology doesn't make me cry. Anyways, moving on to jointing the arms and leggies, I knew in the back of my head how I was going to make these joints, but dang, it's been a while since I've made this type of joint. It wasn't making the joint itself that was a problem. That's actually really easy. That's just taking simple shapes and setting them to inverse Boolean, which cuts out the joint shape from inside the base mesh. It was me overthinking small details like the inner curve between the joint itself and the elbow. I'll try to explain this the best I can, but the worst case scenario is I'll draw y'all a picture. I wanted the inner elbow to have a nice curve, so I duplicated the joint cylinder and modified it so that setting it to inverse Boolean would only cut out the arm mesh in the confines of the modified cylinder. In combination with the modified rectangle concealing the arm and also being set to inverse Boolean with the elbow beam being set to Boolean, the result should in theory just be the top half of the arm. As you can see, the way I did this is kind of a mess, but I did it again for the lower arm and the legs. Coming back to the torso, I booleaned the holes for the shoulder and the hips, deleted the covering of the shoulder and the hip holes, did a special remeshing process, extruded the torso's wall inward, and now I have a hollow torso. I did another boolean thing and divided it in half. Then I took the top half and extruded an inner ring and used that to boolean the bottom. I made the ribbon visible and did another boolean thing that makes the ribbon stick to the body. Doing it this way, I found the wraparound ribbon of the body easier to manage. That being, booleaning the ribbon to the body at this point was easier. In my head. As for why I separated it into two pieces, I'm trying to figure out how to print stuff that's easy to put together while also reducing visible ugly print holes that I hate. There's like 4 dolls I want to revisit and modify because I can definitely do better at my current skill level. But anyways, look, torso. Something inside me said that George, be quiet. Something inside me said that the shoulder and hip sockets were too tight for the arms and legs to move properly, so I decided to expand them a bit with a sphere boolean. If I let you out, you better not try to come back in. You're like a cat. To make pinholes for the joints, I set a cylinder's diameter to the equivalent of 1 millimeter in inches, and I set it to Boolean on the elbow and knee beans, as well as the appendages themselves. That's how they move. To make the neck joint, I took half a sphere, made it bigger than I needed it to be, and then I extruded it for thickness so that it hopefully doesn't break. I took the hot dog from earlier and booleaned magnet holes in it so that it can hold the mask, but for some reason I don't have footage of this, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. In preparation for Gangle's facial expressions, I take the base mask I made during the blockout phase and boolean magnet holes in the mask, and then use the masking tool to make Gangle's facial expressions. I polygroup the masked areas, click Smooth by Groups, and extrude the polygroup inward so that her expression isn't just painted on. Using a sphere and the bend curve function, I make her teardrops, so now we have her tragedy mask. For her comedy mask, it's the same masking, grouping, smooth by groups, remeshing, and extruding process as before. The only difference is that I'm also using another block as a boolean to make the mask look broken. Before printing, I take the time to smooth down hard edges because these will always print out sharper than you'd think. It just makes the toy safer, quote unquote, since resin prototypes can be kinda brittle. I had a good idea of how I wanted Gangle to look after I printed her, but to get a glimpse of it before printing, I decided to use some preset ZBrush materials and some poly paint to see the hypothetical results. The thing about poly paint is that you have to do it by hand, or in my case a stylus pen, but the results can be well worth it. The rendered turntable animation looks great. That is, if you ignore the mouse cursor at the top edge of the screen. As you can see, my hopes is that the clear resin will support her body while giving the illusion that she's just ribbons. Now it's time to ready her for printing. I decided kind of last minute to include a hole in the hand to hold the mask, and we'll see if that works out during assembly. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, I want to print dolls in a way that's easier to assemble while preventing print lines and support holes as much as possible. The way I printed Gummy was kind of a preview to this, and in this case, I divided the arms and legs in half so that the supports would be on the interior of the doll. Did I write left and right indicators? Nah. I brought the pieces into my printing software and did my best to place her parts in the most balanced, space-saving, optimal way that I could. In the midst of this project, episode 4 of the Amazing Digital Circus had released, and I swear Gangle was my next planned digital circus doll before I knew the episode would be about her. And after watching it, I asked myself, what if I also made her manic mask? As of writing this script, I've already printed out all of her parts, so her new mask is somewhat of a last-minute addition. The next video in this process will be about her paint job and assembly, so be sure to come back for that very soon. If you'd like to see more from me, please check out my card linked in the description for all of my social medias. I usually call out my website at this point in the video, but my website is currently under construction. But hopefully it should be back up by the end of January, as well as part 2 of making Gangle. I was hoping to finish this project in December, but the holidays tend to be the busiest time for me with work, Christmas, Hanukkah, all that good stuff. And getting a flu shot knocked me out for a bit. But anyways, I hope you're all doing well. If no one told you today, the world wouldn't be the same without you. Know that you're valued and you make my world a better place every day. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, and Shalom everyone!